Hello, my name is Pasquale Arenza from Universitario Juan Carlos, and the topic for today is Teaching in English in Higher Education and Professional Development, a literature review. This presentation is structured as follows: introduction, objectives, methodology, results, and conclusion. So, let's start describing English as a medium of instruction. What is English as a medium of instructions? In these charts, we've got several definitions. Perhaps the most common one, the most popular one, is the Julie Darden one. The author describes EMI as the use of the English language to teach academic subjects in countries or jurisdictions where the first language of the majority of the population is not English. So what these definitions have in common is that they talk about EMI as for higher education. And they all talk about L1, but they're not specific on the type of L1. Recently, Dafoe and Smith talked about EMIMAS, English Medium Education in Multilingual University Settings. So they substitute instructions with education, which, as we can see, it's much more inclusive. And also they talk about multilingual environment as opposed to L1. So L1 is not necessarily the shared language in the learning environment. There could be several L1 in the same classroom, but we are learning through the medium of the English language. Obviously, EMI has some kind of implication. First of all, comes from all the process of internationalization and Bologna process. We know that when universities want to internationalize, they start offering courses in English to gain prestige, accreditation. Ledesma and Barrera explain quite clearly the connection between EMI and the Bologna process. And I quote, "The popularity of EMI in Europe mostly stems from the recommendation included International Agenda of the Bologna Declaration, where the teaching of university courses in English is promoted as an essential means to increase international competitiveness and excellence of European universities." What we can gather from this definition is that EMI is not education driven, but is policy driven. And this is a very important aspect. Is important because obviously EMI comes with some kind of problems, challenges, and concerns. One of these concerns is what has been defined as Englishization of university. According to Gallwey and McKinley, Englishization can be defined as the process in which the English language is increasingly gaining ground in domains where another language was previously used. The other concern is what is called domain loss. These definitions came up in a few years ago in the northern of Europe. Hutogren describes quite clearly what is it, and it refers to the idea that the growing use of English in key transnational domains, notably higher education and multinational cooperation, will lead to the official national languages, where Swedish, Danish, Finnish, ceasing to develop, losing status, and ending up not being used at all. So, in these two definitions, we can perceive some sorts of critical attitude towards this development and use of English as a lingua franca, of course. And in fact, a number of authors have even talked about linguistic injustice, linguistic inequality, or even linguistic imperialism when talking about the development of the English language in domains such as higher education. But we can't deny that EMI represents a big challenge for all the stakeholders involved, is a challenge for the policymakers, which is a macro level, is a challenge for the university leader, meso level, is a challenge for students and teachers, which is micro level. And with this challenge, the last challenge, the challenge for the teacher, that I want to introduce my research question for this paper. I wanted to answer the following question. What are the current practices of professional development of EMI teachers in European University? What we can gather from the current practices and what can be done to improve professional development for EMI teachers? The idea comes from my personal experience. I taught General English first, EFL, and then I slowly moved towards more EAP and even EMI. And I realized how just being proficient in English is just not enough to teach EMI. It's not a guarantee of success. And so that's why I wanted to explore more this research area. The idea was the literature review came because I wanted to evaluate the current literature in order to identify patterns and trends to see if we can gather some kind of effective solutions. I used the search engine Scopus and I used the following keywords for my research. However, the results in the papers they've analyzed are very interesting. One of the key concepts, for example, that emerges from the paper that I analyzed in Scopus is that many authors talks about profiles and the identity of EMI teachers. And the results are interesting. Yes, the profile is a heterogeneous profile. Mainly EMI teachers come from are in social sciences like economics, and the language requirements for teachers can vary. They go from a B2 to C2 of the Common European Framework, although there are some exceptions in case, for example, teachers that study their PhD in English-speaking countries or when they've been teaching in English-speaking countries for some time, then these requirements are not applied. So the requirements can be quite flexible depending on the cases. But the most interesting aspect is the profile, which is point number 3. EMI teachers, they consider themselves content teachers and they're not language experts, and they don't feel comfortable in dealing perhaps with language issues. Another key concept emerging from the papers analyzed is the certification of competencies and accreditation. Talking about EMI courses, the courses are quite diverse. They go from 1 week course training to workshop or seminars, and as was mentioned before, they are individual institution that decides to organize and carry out the courses. What Maccaro, Jimenez, and Lasagabasta call light touch CPD. However, as they state in their paper of 2018, certification must go beyond the measure taken by their own institution. Indeed, that it should have a more global reference. And of course, there are some Anglophone providers of EMI qualification for teachers, mainly EMI course of Oxford University, Cambridge University, and also the British Council provides some EMI training for teachers in higher education. But what can we gather from this panorama that is quite diverse and quite independent initiatives from several universities? Well, the framework of common standards should be developed, more unified and comprehensive teacher development program. These are the conclusions that Maccaro, Jimenez, and Lasagabasta states in their paper of 2019. Another important aspect that emerges from the paper analyzed is the relationship that EMI has with L1. The papers stress that EMI classes are not just English classes. L1 was integrated in EMI lectures, like in the study Dine, Van Schaan, Rose, and Maccaro, and this is connected to the practice of code switching, multilingual approach, and flexible language policy that should be taken into account in implemented EMI courses for teachers. And in fact, Shan, Rose, and Macaro states that PD programs may offer teachers the foundation for more systematic strategic use of L1. And I would add any other discourse strategies. For example, in other papers, they were analyzed the effective use of questionings to increase student interaction. So L1 is not a problem. We just need to learn how to use L1 in EMI context, in EMI classes effectively in order to get our objective, which is our educational goal. Many authors talks about the pedagogical competencies, or what we should say, the lack of pedagogical competencies. Macaro, Jimenez, and Lazagabaster interviewed several EMI teachers, and they all complained about the lack of pedagogical skills. This because PD training were heavily focused on language, and so some authors have recognized the need to include teaching methodology or knowledge of second language acquisition theories in professional development courses for EMI teacher. Not just these points, but also a collaboration between content experts and language experts, the introduction of scaffolding techniques and material in order to change the approach for a much more student approach in class. And last but not least, some authors include the multimodal approach in class. So clearly the EMI class should be a different kind of class where methodology is paramount. Methodology is important. This session presents examples of professional development courses from EMI teachers. The academic lecturing program of University Ca' Foscari in Venice included some ICT training, for example. Or, for example, in the pedagogical proposal for in-service training, EMI teacher training, Mendes Garcia and Aguillot stressed the importance of non-verbal language in their courses and also effective use of discourse strategies such as questioning in EMI classes in order to gain to our educational goal. In this last example, EMI lecturer training workshop in July 2018 in an engineering school in France, the workshop focused on the interactions between students and teacher, but also on the reflection practice, which was extremely important. So although studies have been conducted by many authors, there's still a big research gap in professional development for EMI teachers. We've seen there is a lack of common framework of practice. The initiatives are taken by single institutions, and when PD courses are offered, they language focused. So in this session is devoted to proposing a model of PD course for EMI teachers based on the results of the recommendation that we've seen so far. A professional development course should include a methodological approach, should have a methodological approach. They should include student-centered approach. They should perhaps involve scaffolding techniques and material, and should include also the multimodality. The course should include also discourse strategies, or better to say, effective use of discourse strategies for EMI teachers. Like, for example, how to use L1, how strategically use L1 in English classes, and also how to use questions effectively in order to increase student-centered approach, which is student talking time. Last but not least, the course should consider the team teaching option, which is the collaboration between content subject and content expert and language expert. This could be beneficial to solve, for example, the problem of the language when content teacher feels quite uncomfortable in dealing with those language problems that quite often come up in EMI classes. But team teaching also comes with its own challenges, given by human factors, social factors, or even economic availability of single institution. Let me conclude by saying that professional development courses for EMI teachers are very important because they're an opportunity to reflect and renew on our own teaching practice, given what Laszlo Gabaste defined the pedagogical solitude characteristics at tertiary level. Thank you for your time, and I'll be happy to answer all your questions.